Hey everyone, Cynics here. Today I'm going to be sharing all of my current methods and tips on using Procreate. This is not sponsored or anything like that. I'm just currently using Procreate for a lot of the art I do, and I know a lot of you have also picked up iPads and been dabbling around with it. So it seems like a great time to make a video on it. Anyway, there are definitely a lot of other great art programs out there for the iPad as well, but I find that this one works well for me, so I'm just gonna stick with it. I do want to make a quick note of a couple important hardware things. I'm using a 2nd gen iPad Pro with a paper-like screen protector. I consider the last part very important. Not the brand or anything, you don't have to use a paper-like screen protector, but any matte finish screen protector is highly recommended for getting the most out of your iPad. Otherwise, you're just going to be slipping and sliding all around that glass surface with far less control. Alright, let's get into this video. The most important first step is understanding the basic setup and controls. Personally, I always just open up new canvases at screen size because it seems efficient enough. If you're heavy-handed or light-handed, it's always good to mildly adjust the pen pressure curve to suit your tendencies. That should be the first thing you do in any art program. Now, I recommend acclimating yourself to the program by just using the HB pencil for a while. Some people like the 6B pencil, but I think the HB is a little softer on the texture, which makes it look a little better in my opinion. We'll just be using that for the first chunk of this video exclusively. It's the only real brush I use for drawing, and it has a lot of versatility. So while you're noodling around with that, basic controls would be good to know. A 2-finger tap will of course undo anything, a 3-finger tap will redo things you have undone, and you can also clear the whole layer if you hold those 3 fingers down and wiggle them a bit. The second most useful thing is that you can hold your finger down briefly to color pick. Things like zooming in and rotating should be intuitive enough. You guys have all used smartphones and basically any touch device by now. If you want to make a straight line, you can just hold the pencil in place for a bit after you've started a line, and it will snap to a straight line. You can technically do that with curves and angles as well. You can do a color fill by holding and dragging the current color from that top right color selector, and that's pretty useful. You can kind of move your finger back and forth to adjust the way it fills. Honestly, there's a lot of hidden nonsense you can do with the controls, but I think those are the main things that I personally use on a regular basis. One additional control feature you might want to look into is the swipe controls. Anthony Jones recently showed me these, so credit to him, but there is an option to turn on a small control menu whenever you put your finger on the screen. It brings up a little radial selection menu, and you can program the commands on it and swipe toward them to use them. For instance, you can set the top one to horizontal flip, which is, by the way, very useful, and now anytime you just swipe up on the screen with one finger, it flips the canvas. Now, Anthony Jones just uses it like this, but personally, I found because of how I hold the stylus and everything, that I was accidentally triggering it far too often. Luckily, there is an option to make it so it only comes up when you're holding this little box icon below the brush size control, and this is the ideal solution for myself. So I have been getting a lot of use out of this feature, and you can program it however you like. Let's go over layers for a moment. If I'm just sketching, I tend to treat every layer like a page in a sketchbook. I believe the limit in Procreate is something like 20 layers. I'm not a very intensive layer person, so I haven't actually reached that limit. But some important things to know about layers: if you click the layer, you can change a lot of the settings for that layer. The most value one probably being alpha lock, or maybe clipping mask, whatever, depending on your methods. Now, if you click that little letter next to the layer name, that will let you change the blending mode and opacity of the layer. It's usually set to N for normal. So if you need to change, say, your line art to a multiply layer, that's the place to do it. Also, you can swipe the layer toward the left, and that's where you get the option to duplicate or delete a layer. Finally, it's very valuable to know that you can hold a layer for a moment and then drag it to change the order of the layers. And my personal favorite, you can even squeeze them together to combine 2 or more into one layer. Alright, enough about all of that. Let's just have some fun with the HB pencil. It should feel pretty natural. You can use the side of the pencil to build up a bit of tone and just have fun exploring. A quick tip, I recommend using an 80 to 90% black value for your color. Don't go for the full digital black, that'll look a bit fake. This is a pencil after all, we want it to feel like a pencil. So in order for it to feel realistic, anywhere between that 80 to 90% range is probably about right. And by the way, that will also be useful when you're colorizing the line work later. And some more notes, you're going to see me erasing. For that, I'm using the round brush. We're also going to get into smudging, and I just have that set to the flat brush at the moment, but any kind of more boring brush will be just fine for that. For this first demonstration, we're going to go above and beyond just sketching and start relying on the smudging tool to blur out ideas and rebuild them continually. Just trying to feel out a design and build up some value at the same time. You could potentially make some finished looking value paintings just using this method. I find the constant destruction and rebuilding to be a great entry-level method into most of my views on design theory, relying on a bit of chaos to invoke your visual library and then bringing shapes forward with fun, energetic lines. It also encourages you to not get too attached to your drawings, which is very important. Anyway, this is starting to look like some Octodad nonsense, but that's okay. The next little tool that I think you'll get a lot of mileage out of is the liquify tool. Yeah, that's right, they have a liquify tool just like in Photoshop, and it is delightful. If proportions or perspective get a little bit off, just liquefy things back into place. It's very well integrated into Procreate and really helps save a lot of time. Just click on the little magic wand effects thing at the top and find it in that drop-down menu. I think that's about enough of this silly looking guy. You can see how easy it would be to just iterate around on a design forever, blurring things out, building them back up, and playing with the overall shapes. Remember, the process should be more fun than the product. Moving on, for this next demonstration, we're going to be using just a big, soft, round airbrush. The point of this demo is to get you comfortable with the selection tools. We'll try a quick environment, so we can either drag and drop in a fill tone for the background, but probably airbrush it a bit to add a subtle gradient. Now that third upper icon on the left, the one that looks like an S, is the selection control. I'm going to freehand a selection for some distant mountains. Now you can either bring it back to that starting dot and add as many selections as you want, or just kind of leave it unfinished and it will do its best to guess what you're going for. Once you have a selection, you just gotta airbrush it out with that large size airbrush. Keep it nice and subtle in the background. Now I can go through, repeating this process a bunch, building up contrast as we get closer and closer in space. This is of course a very rough example, so I do apologize for the composition. I probably should have thought it out more, but oh well. We can add some figures with the selection tool, even some highlight effects, and we're pretty much done. I'll draw in a couple quick lines and details just for fun, but I don't want to overinvest. Overall, this is just a fun, effective way to play around with compositions and thumbnails, and ideally improve yourself at them. Actually, this does leave us open to try one more thing. Procreate doesn't have gradient maps, which I would have recommended, but if we go to that second upper left icon, we can do a color balance. Adjusting the colors on the shadows, midtones, and highlights is a quick way to bring in some easy color to a grayscale image and get a little bit of that gradient map effect, leaving us in a good spot to potentially start freely painting on top of these colors. Well, I think that's about all for this example. It's time to start exploring some other brushes, and I have a fun bonus for you all. I've made my own simple set of brushes, which are kind of similar to what you've seen me use in Corel Painter, and I'm going to of course be sharing those with all of you. Maybe you'll enjoy them, maybe you won't, but at least they're available to mess around with. The link will be in the description below, and please just Google how to install them. I don't want to make a whole video on that, but I'll be hosting them on my Patreon page. And don't worry, you don't have to be a Patreon supporter or anything to get them. They will always be public and free to everyone. I'm just hosting them there because it's a very reliable spot to put things. Let's just run through these real fast. The HB pencil is of course the default HB pencil, so skipping ahead to the scratchboard brush, that is just a flat-edged brush with a size jitter. trying to recreate the scratchboard pen from Corel Painter that I usually use for just drawing and all of that sort of hard edge stuff. The thick and thin brush is also a recreation of the thick and thin pen from Painter. It's basically just the scratchboard brush, but with a little bit of opacity thrown in. It's pretty good for making chaotic marker-looking sketches when ideating, kind of how you would with a Copic marker. Next up is the Dry Brush Light. Now this is a cheap knockoff attempt of my favorite Corel Painter brush, the Dry Brush. It stores a short amount of paint in each stroke and then turns itself into a blending brush until you pick it back up off the screen to reload it. It's definitely not a perfect recreation, but I've learned to make it work pretty well. It's the quickest way to build up a lot of form in a single stroke with hard edges and soft edges all in one. Next is the round opacity, which is supposed to be like a basic Photoshop style round brush with pressure set to opacity. It's a pretty good all-purpose painting and drawing brush if you want it to be. The glow brush is of course similar to the glow brush in Painter, although not quite as fancy. It basically just color dodges. It's still good for lighting effects. The soft airbrush is of course what you saw previously. I've been getting a lot of use out of that just for making big gradient shifts across a whole canvas and harmonizing things as well. The tri-beam is just an attempt at a triangle shaped brush for sketching. It's a bit unwieldy, but I'm trying to get a little better at it. It can be good though to have that little bit of chaos. The trifection brush is a combination of the tri-beam and the dry brush. I've been using it for a lot more detail-oriented stuff that I would use the dry brush for, so it's kind of fun to make some little tight lines and then blend them out to one side. It's a little bit crunchier in the end than the dry brush. Just a little hint of that chaos. So it's a little bit fun. You might enjoy it. Once again, these brushes are a little bit complicated. There's also the damp brush in there. I don't know why that's in there, but whatever, I'll just leave it. So that's all of it. Let's just try to put it all together now and make a quick painting. I didn't plan anything out, so I'll just start with some face doodles. That's normal enough. I'm gonna use the HB pencil and hope for the best. I think this will somewhat work. It looks like some sort of girl with weird clothing and some butterflies floating around. I do want you to pay attention to some design theory stuff though. I'm purposely simplifying every butterfly into a big, medium, and small shape, which is of course one of the pillars of good design. This should make them all more graphically appealing, just from that 2D standpoint. Same thing with the hair on the back of her head and any other random element that I can remember to include. Always implement shape hierarchy if you want a good drawing. I'm also not afraid to liquefy at any point to improve things, or flip the canvas to check stuff. Incorporate those things into your regular workflow. Okay, it's time for a base color layer. I was thinking of having a blue background and general ambience, so even though the local color of the skin wouldn't be blue, I'm going to block it out with a nice blue color. I've been doing this more and more often lately. It tends to just give a nice effect and base for you to build skin tones on top of. I highly stress the importance of being playful and experimental with your underpainting elements. This is the best stage to do it. So once those skin areas are blocked out, I'm going to alpha lock this layer. Now I can use a bit of airbrushing to add some proper color and gradations to the skin. Gradiating your base colors is wonderful. Not only is it pretty and fun, but it's gonna make things look less stiff and more realistic in the long run. Hue variation is so important in skin tones, so getting it in early can really help. Now once that gradation is done, I can use that trifection brush to try to cut in some harder edges of highlights to really pop out some planes on the face. I decided not to go too dramatic with the lighting. It's going to be fairly even and boring, which is probably a mistake. But the face and pose were pretty undynamic anyway, so might as well make the whole thing boring. That's what I call consistency. No, that's a terrible idea, but after adding the hair and background tone, I decided to just color shift the skin toward a much more unique blue tone. But it was at this point that I was honestly starting to really worry about this image. I wasn't feeling that happy with the lack of anything dynamic, and my spirit was dying. The only solution to not give up was to just go extreme with hot pink and cyan. Everything from here on is just a mess of those two super bright colors to keep me amused until the eventual dumpster death of this image. Once again though, I'm trying to avoid just adding lines or making any tiny shapes and really focusing on design theory and shape appeal to at least make some chunky, big triangular shapes. So I rushed through it and it's super sloppy, but I'm just going to call this one done. It was around 1 hour of effort altogether on this image. One step that I completely overlooked in mentioning is that I did do a color balance on my line art layer after doing the base colors. I made all of the lines a little more brownish, slightly warmish, in order to mesh with the colors. You've seen me do that in Corel Painter 1,000 times, and I want to emphasize that I do that in Procreate as well. Anyway, I didn't get a chance to show off my dry brush nonsense that much, so that's no fun. Some of you may be familiar with the creature designs I've been doing on my Instagram lately. These are often a mix of previous techniques I've talked about, but also a bit more heavy on the dry brush, such as in this one, which was almost entirely done just building up things with the dry brush. You really want to get into that sculptor mindset and visualize the 3D forms as something you're building up and carving into. Actually, let's just do a quick example. Using the dry brush, I'll spend about 15 minutes building up a blobby mutant potato. I'll still use the pencil and airbrush just at a couple moments along the way, but mostly you're going to be seeing a lot of dry brush. Sometimes including a nice punch of secondary light around the edge can really take the overall feeling of form to the next level. But those flat highlights wouldn't work nearly as well if you didn't have the dry brush there carving out those little crevices and softly blending everything around the form. Honestly, if you feel like you're struggling with form stuff, the best way to improve is to draw contour lines on everything. Just nonsense blobs, add tons of contour lines. Anytime you're doing figure drawing, real life stuff from imagination, contour lines on everything. And you'll really start to feel more of a sense of form anytime you're drawing. I love doing it personally. I do it for fun on a lot of my creature designs. And it just helps me stumble into new designs as well. Just having all those little cut lines, contours around everything, they give you new ideas. So really, do it a lot. Okay, but enough mutant potatoing. Let's just wrap up this video. If you have any super important questions about Procreate, I'm sure I forgot plenty of stuff, so feel free to ask in the comments below, and feel free to answer other people's questions if you know the answer. This video got delayed many times because of scheduling nonsense, but I'm happy to have something to finally share with you guys. Once again, please enjoy the free brushes in the link below, and I will do my best to start the next video right away. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone for taking the time to watch this video, and of course the biggest, most special, most loving thank you to all of my Patreon supporters, who truly do make these videos possible. See you everyone. Make sure to visit me at Lightbox.